This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system quietly reaching a point where it no longer corrects itself. Right now, power is being tested. Not in public hearings, not in elections, but in late-night phone calls, private panic, and decisions made when no cameras are on. You are not supposed to notice this part, because if you did, you would understand something unsettling, that the most dangerous failures don't announce themselves. They normalize. What looks like noise is actually structure shifting. What sounds like chaos is a method, and what's being strained isn't political loyalty. It's the idea that power still has limits. Stay with me, because once you see how this works, you won't be able to unsee it. And the next step in this process is already underway. What actually controls this system right now is not a person. It's leverage. Leverage created by emergencies, by speed, by the ability to act first and explain later. In theory, power flows through institutions, through laws, through oversight, through time. But in practice, power has been drifting toward whoever can compress the timeline, whoever can declare that something cannot wait, whoever can say this is urgent and force everyone else into reaction mode. That's the shift. Control no longer comes from persuasion or consensus. It comes from acceleration. When everything is framed as a crisis, restraint looks reckless. Oversight looks slow, and saying wait starts to sound like sabotage. This is why personalities don't matter here. Any leader who learns this lesson inherits the same advantage. Any system that allows it trains the next one. And once that dynamic takes hold, the guardrails don't break loudly. They thin, they bend, which brings us to how this became normal without most people noticing. There was a time when extraordinary powers actually felt extraordinary, before emergencies were rare, specific, embarrassing to invoke unless absolutely necessary, before restraint was a signal of strength. Waiting was part of legitimacy. Delay meant deliberation. Now urgency is the baseline. What changed wasn't the law, it was the tempo. Emergency language stopped being a response to danger and became a governing style, a way to move faster than scrutiny, a way to outrun consequence. And the most effective shifts don't arrive all at once. They arrive in increments small enough to defend, small enough to justify, small enough to forget. Each declaration reframed the last one as precedent. Each exception lowered the cost of the next, until the extraordinary started to feel routine. That's the risk with slow change. It doesn't feel like loss, it feels like adaptation. But adaptation cuts both ways. Systems adjust, so do abuses. And once acceleration becomes normal, the system stops asking whether it should move, only whether it can, which is why the first real shock didn't come from outside the system at all. Then the system flinched, not because of a foreign attack, not because of a market crash, but because a line was crossed out loud. The idea of using American military force against Allied territory was floated publicly, not as theory, not as satire, as a possibility. That matters because alliances are not symbolic. They are legal commitments. They are tripwires by design. An action taken in one place obligates response everywhere else. And suddenly, people whose job is to understand that math started doing it in real time. Quietly at first, phone calls, hallway meetings, coordination you don't see on television. What emerged was an outrage. It was containment, a war powers resolution, bipartisan, targeted. Explicitly designed to limit unilateral action. That does not happen casually. That happens when internal alarms trip. If you're trying to understand why this moment matters, stay with me. Because this wasn't resistance to a decision. It was resistance to a pattern. And the response to that resistance is where the real story begins. Here's how the system actually works when that kind of resistance appears. When formal power hits a limit, it looks for another door. Not confrontation, circumvention. That door is emergency authority, because emergencies don't just unlock tools, they change the rules of engagement. Once something is labeled urgent, timelines collapse. Oversight slows by comparison, and beneficiaries don't have to argue their case. They inherit momentum. In this case, the emergency wasn't about immediate danger. It was framed around future energy security, assets, access. Promises that would take years to materialize, if they ever did. But that delay doesn't matter politically, because emergencies aren't about outcomes, they're about control. Who benefits is predictable. Large actors who can absorb uncertainty, who can wait, who are insulated from the risk, who absorbs the damage is quieter. Institutions, processes, anyone whose job depends on time, documentation, or verification. This is how pressure is redistributed, not evenly, strategically. And once this mechanism is activated, resistance doesn't end the story. It accelerates it. The response wasn't negotiation. It was anger. Direct, personal, unfiltered. Calls were made, voices raised, lines crossed, because when authority is treated as personal property, limitation feels like theft. And when that happens, escalation becomes instinctive. Another emergency, another reframing, another reason everything must happen now. Attention fragments, stories collide, oversight competes with noise. This is how the zone gets flooded. Not accidentally, deliberately. Every new declaration forces institutions to chase instead of question, to react instead of examine. And while everyone is busy tracking the latest move, something slower keeps falling behind. Deadlines pass, documents don't arrive, promises of transparency evaporate without explanation. No explosion, no scandal. Just delay. That's the danger, because systems don't fail when alarms are loud. They fail when procedures quietly stop functioning. And once that becomes normal, reversal gets harder with every step, which is why the next pressure point isn't about power at all. It's about you. This is where it reaches you, not as policy, not as theory, as consequence. When oversight slows, prices don't fall, they drift. When accountability fades, risk doesn't disappear, it transfers. You feel it in instability that never quite resolves, in systems that feel permanently under maintenance, in decisions made faster than anyone explains them. You're told it's temporary, that it's complicated, that it's necessary. But what's actually happening is simpler. Time, the thing that protects you, is being removed from decision-making. And once time is gone, you don't get a vote. You get an announcement. This is why emergency language matters. It turns the public into an audience and participation into compliance. If this feels abstract, don't look at the headlines. Look at how often you're asked to accept outcomes before you're given explanations. Stay with me, because what's happening here isn't contained. It's already moving outward. And once it crosses that line, it doesn't come back quietly. This doesn't stay domestic, because when a system built on alliances starts signaling unpredictability, everyone adjusts, quietly, preemptively. Allies don't wait for clarification. They hedge. Commitments that once felt automatic start getting reevaluated. Defense planning changes tone. Diplomacy slows down or roots around uncertainty. Not because anyone wants conflict, but because systems hate volatility. And when emergency logic becomes a governing default, it doesn't translate well across borders. What sounds decisive at home reads as unstable abroad. That's when ripples form. Markets price and risk. Treaties get interpreted more cautiously. Trust, the invisible infrastructure, thins. None of this makes headlines immediately. It shows up in delays, in hesitation, in parallel plans being drawn up just in case. This is how a local power shift becomes a global variable. And once that happens, no single institution controls the outcome anymore. Everyone is reacting to everyone else. Which brings us to the future, not as prediction, as trajectory. From here, there are three paths. None of them are clean. All of them are already forming. The first is adjustment. Institutions adapt just enough to survive. Emergency powers remain, but friction increases. Oversight reasserts itself slowly. The system bends but doesn't break. The second is erosion. Guardrails stay on paper but stop functioning in practice. Emergencies become routine. Deadlines stop meaning anything. Power flows faster than accountability can follow. Nothing collapses. It just thins. The third is rupture, a moment where acceleration outruns legitimacy, where a decision taken under emergency logic forces a response that can't be contained, where allies, markets, or institutions react in ways no one can reverse. Here's the problem. These paths don't announce themselves. They overlap. Adjustment can slide into erosion. Erosion can suddenly become rupture. And the choice point isn't one dramatic vote or speech. It's whether resistance keeps pace with acceleration. That balance hasn't tipped yet, but it's moving, which means how this ends isn't decided. Only delayed. There's a temptation to look for reassurance here, for signs that the system will correct itself automatically. It won't. Systems only hold when enough friction remains inside them. Not heroism, not intention, resistance. What we're watching now isn't a collapse. It's a measurement. How much pressure can institutions absorb before they stop pushing back? How often can emergency language replace explanation before it becomes the language of governance? How long can power accelerate before legitimacy can't keep up? None of that resolves cleanly. It accumulates. Late-night phone calls, votes that quietly matter, deadlines missed without consequence. This isn't about one presidency. It's about the template being written for everyone that follows. If you want to understand what happens next, you have to keep watching the parts that don't trend, the procedures, the oversight, the friction, because the moment those disappear, the outcome won't be debated. It will be announced. And by the time it's obvious, it will already be too late to stop. Stay with this. The next phase is already taking shape.